Welcome back. This is the podcast with me, your host, Pete Tigers. The new mag is out and I'm pleased with how it looks and reads. There's some great articles. And again, we've really tried hard to mix up contributors. Richard, who I work with, we were in a meeting the other day, said that since I've started, we've had 40 new contributors so far. So that's been fun to try and vary content and make it a little bit different. In this issue, I talk about my origin story, my deep connection with Devon. That was fun to write about. And at time of recording as well, we're still in a bit of a heat wave. It feels a little cooler and I'm hoping I might be able to catch the back end of the Mayfly on the tour before too long. My fingers are really tightly crossed. And so on to my guest today. I was contacted by listener Keith, who suggested I speak with this person. One of the lovely things about this podcast is the messages I get from listeners. And so I'd like to say a huge thank you to everyone who writes and listens, of course, too. But anyway, I reached out and today I'm really pleased to be joined by Neil Smith. Neil, it's lovely to have you along on the podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Pete. I've got to say, it's a bit surreal. I'm usually listening to you en route to the fishing Saturday, Sunday or whenever I'm en route. And to be sort of talking at this screen at both myself and you is sort of really sort of weird, to be fair. But hey, I probably know the podcast as well as you do.
I think you probably know it a little bit better than me. But let's kick off. For listeners, can you tell us where you're based and what that means from a fishing perspective?
I'm based in the northwest, right smack back in the middle of the northwest in Wigan, which sort of gives me great sort of a catchment going up to the Ribble and all its tributaries. And a little bit further afield, I can go on the River Kent, which I fish quite a lot. But I also get on the Eden, the Loon, and the choice is staggering. You really, once you get into that, was before you get into the urban rivers around Manchester, which there's so much to go at, and because I do a little bit of everything, I also have a boat on Windermere that I do a lot of perch and pipe fishing. It can be really difficult on 1 or 2 days a week to actually nail what you're going to do, and sometimes no matter what you do, you think, I should be over there, I should be on here, it'll be right for this river, for that river, or for Windermere. But in the main, I try and do as much as I can with the limited time that I've got.
That sounds like a really nice mix to me. So how would you describe yourself as an angler? Are you a fly angler? Are you a coarse angler? Are you a salmon angler? Do you do just about everything? And that's how it all works really well from you, from the sort of fishing that you're going to do and how you choose it at the weekend or during the week?
I do a bit of everything, Pete. I mean, some would say I'm an all-rounder. I would probably say I'm a jack of all trades, which has crossovers so many times over. From streamer fishing, I've used streamers on a lure rod. I've used streamers when I've been perch fishing, sort of in Derwent water and other places. And it can lead anywhere, and it does lead anywhere at any time. I mean, just this last week, I went on to a stretch of river that very luckily, I run, a tributary of the Ribble. And we found that last week we'd had a bit of a flood, and the CSOs, that naughty word again, CSO, that we keep hearing all over the place, had been released on a flood last week, and it had caused havoc. It's the state of the river come Friday. Well, I fished 2 pools Friday, and it was like, after the second pool, I thought, something not right, nothing rising. There was no dippers, there was no bird life, didn't have a pull. And I thought, what's gone on here? And it all came to light as the level subsided over Saturday, Sunday and Monday. And it was an horrible river. And we ended up sort of reporting that. And as a consequence to that, we have a small pond on the site and I fished for rudd. So I ended up fly fishing for rudd. And as I said, that's where that can go. And it's the same each weekend. I look at the forecast and I try and tailor the fishing to what the weather's doing as much as anything. I mean, first and foremost, I'll fish nymphs, I'll fish streamers, and if they're up on the top, then I'll fish a dry. I'll fish any method, Pete. It's the same. When I say any method, I think you can roll that out across all the disciplines. I don't have just one method. I mean, I could centre pin for grayling. On the same day, I would have a check nymphing rod, and I would even have a dry within 2 seconds. These days, if you're fishing from nymphs to dries, it's so simple. So I don't sort of pigeonhole myself into any given category, other than it's a real broad church, and that's across all species, because throughout the year there's something different, and I think that's what keeps it fresh. I mean, it's quite comical on the home front, where I'll say to Michelle, my wife, I'll say, it's the last day of the coast fishing season tomorrow, and I need to get out. It's the 14th of March. And then in the same sentence, I'll say, but tomorrow's the first day of the trout season, so I need to get out. And and I think a long time ago she stopped saying, well, do what you need to do, because it just rolls on. The next line in the sand's June 16th. And the barbel will start and the grayling will start. You know what I mean? And then the trout finishes the end of September, the salmon finishes the end of October, and the pike starts the 1st of November for me. So it depends whichever way the car's pointed and what the weather's doing, basically, Pete, on that format.
Sounds to me like you got it perfectly locked down. And you made a really interesting point there about reporting that discharge. And I think, often we can say, oh, the river doesn't feel right, or it doesn't feel, but you get it going that extra step and reporting it. It's really, really important, isn't it?
100%. And Nigel Geary, who part of the Ribble Fisheries team, and Nigel does a lot on the pollution, along with a guy called Michael Rhodes. And it's got really sort of difficult at times when you see somebody on social media or on some sort of WhatsApp group bemoaning the fact that there's something wrong with the river. It smells of slurry, or it's like it was the other day on our stretch, where it's coloured and full of foam. And you say to them, have you reported it? And more often than not, they haven't. And the apps are there, the links are there, and it's not just one report on that day. It's the historics that is creating. There's a little brook which enters the Ribble above Eddisford Bridge, which is above where the Hodder comes in and above where the Calder comes in. And this brook has been running discharge for years. But if you didn't report it, you'd never get anywhere, because when I report it to the EA, and I have done recently, the guy from the EA, he looks at his data and he says, we've been on this for nearly 4 years now. Now, if that really went serious, we've got 4 years' worth of data of somebody reporting, and the guy from the EA actually going investigating. So it's not that one report on that day, it's the historics that builds. And I think that's so important, Pete, in terms of what you're creating. Me reporting that over the weekend has put something in an electronic database that we can go back to. If it happens again after the next release, we'll do the same again, and so on and so on. And I think that's so important across any river or anywhere that you're fishing. It's so easy with your phone to, or what 3 words and a pin in a map. This is where I'm at. I mean, the one at Eddisford, I was stood at the side of it, live, video, pin in the map, and it's reported. And something will, sooner or later, we're getting there. But if you don't report it, nobody knows that it's happening. And you've no historics, and I think that's the most important thing about that.
That's a really good point, and I hope people listening will take that on board. We've been doing a little bit more within the magazine about those sorts of things, and we're about to have something about reporting, how to report, and the process, and all of those sorts of stuff. That'll be coming up very shortly as well. So we'll be putting that in before too long. So how's your season been from a salmonid perspective?
Season's been good, Pete. Right from sort of March 15th, the day after the coast fishing season, we've sort of been out on the river and catching well. I've had some nice brown trout from Cumbria and Kent. And there's a bit of a story, really. We've got some fish in that river that historically has been very much a salmon and sea trout river. And then over the last 3 years, the amount of fish that are coming through 3 pound plus is sort of off the scale really. And all of a sudden it's like, where are these fish going? I mean, I've had fish of just touching 6. I've had a fish this year of 5+, and there is fish a good chunk bigger than that, you know, without sort of getting carried away. But wild brown trout, and at first we thought, are these fish, because there is a bit of stocking goes on the Kent, are these fish from triploid background washed throughout the system and then sort of getting big, and that's what you're catching? So one of the fish I caught last year, I'd need to do this much more this next sort of couple of years. I took a scale sample, and going just fast forward in here, we're going to talk about some grayling probably later on. But within that sort of remit of these grayling and the guys at Calverton, I've had some really good contacts, and I got a guy who does scale reading, and I sent this scale across to the guy. Francesco, his name is. Can't pronounce his surname, Pete. But it's Francesco, his name. And he read the scales, and straight away he knocked out of it that it wasn't a triploid fish. It was actually only 3 years old, and it was 50 centimetres long, this fish. And it had spawned, and his comment was that it's in a really rich environment. And it's like, what are they feeding on? Because I don't think these fish are just feeding on sort of olives and whatever else. Now, the other thing that river's got is it's got some white grade clawfish. So I can only presume that there's something going on with them, that they've suddenly sort of boomed. Because on a salmon trip a couple of autumns ago after a big flood, I walked past a pool that was like one of these rock pools when you're on your holidays, and the pool erupted. And I thought, shit, there's a load of fry in there. So I thought, I'm going to put my rod down, and tied the dog up because he goes mental when he sees a fish, which is another story. And I just about put my landing net through it. I thought, I'll just keep going through until I've got all these fry, and I'll put them back in the river. And I realised they were actually white-clawed crayfish, bit of a mouthful. So I thought, wow, they're all sort of the length of your little finger. And I thought, wow, what a food source that is. So whether a slight demise in sort of sea trout, slight demise in salmon, all this last couple of years on the River Kent has been outstanding, got to say. Whether these brown trout have taken advantage of a food source is you know, some more investigation needs to be done, really. But in terms of my fishing this year, sort of had that fish, as I say, I think it was 5.12, and I've had other fish at 3. I've had sea trout to just over 4, and yeah, it's going okay. But on the immediate sort of home front, on the rivers that I run, I'm fortunate where I run 3 stretches of river, one on the main Ribble, which is more chub and barbel, and then I've 2 trout and grayling streams. The one that is with the slight pollution problem that we've had this last week is it really kicked in, Pete, before this sort of pollution came in. I took a guy on, he'd not really cast a fly rod before, and he had 4 hookups. Well, and well, we were just trying to show him how to cast a short line, you know what I mean? It was like, wow, it sort of suddenly kicked in. So they suddenly started taking up in the water as well. They were taking dries, and this is sort of 2 weeks ago now. So if you recall, we're obviously now in the middle of a heat wave, but 2 weeks ago you had snoods on and sort of extra layers. And then all of a sudden they starting taking not just the nymphs and bugs that I use, but they're then taking a spider and then taking a dry. And we've had some really good sport recently. And the other river, which is at the top of the Calder system, and again, just going back to home rivers, the Ribble system is my home river. I can be there in 15, 20 minutes. And the upper stretches of the Calder, which I touched on before we started talking, Pete, we've had some issues with the predation, and we feared the worst, because I took this stretch on back in August last year, and it was late on to really do much with it from a fly fishing point of view. But Paul Gaskell and the Wild Trout Trust, they did a survey for us, I've got to say what a day that was from sort of unearthing all sorts of things that, even with the fishery background that I've run several fisheries, still waters and rivers, it opened up my eyes quite significantly what Paul did. And, what Paul's doing in the Wild Trout Trust is outstanding. And from that, we realised we had a bit of a gem potential on our hands. But then the trout season finished. But as I said to the missus, well, the the grayling starts really after the end of September, so we were on with that, and we were full on through the winter. We were full on, and this is where this predation sort of kicked in a bit. We were full on up to about the middle to the end of November, where I could go on with a centre pin and fish for these grayling or fish some bugs, and you catch numerous sort of year classes of grayling, and then you catch a few out of season brownies, and then in no time at all, boom, gone. Couldn't get a bite, couldn't see a fish, but each time you were there was cormorants there, and as that went on, there's not a lot, and there is a lot you can do, but you've got to go down the channels in terms of working that a license, etc., to do it sort of properly. And to be there, you've got to have somebody who's going to be there on a regular basis, and this is perhaps what we'll touch on shortly as well in terms of that. So we went out of that winter period and into this spring, and going into sort of the middle of March, obviously when the trout season kicked in, and it was cold easterlies, and I was fishing sort of nymphs and bugs, and the water clarity at times was so good I could actually see the bugs, how they fished. And they were fishing sort of across the river, as opposed to, people think that, I'm pretty sure that they think that they're fishing straight down. Well, they're fishing like a washing line across the river, depending on obviously how heavy your point fly is. But they were fishing really well, I felt, these bugs. And I went through pool after pool and never had anything whatsoever, apart from in the last pool right at the top of the beat, I hooked a fish which was probably £3, and it took a case caddis imitation, and it leapt out the river 2 or 3 times, and that was the end of that. But that sort of pointed to something again, because when you get predation, you get two scales. You get the big fish and the tiny fish. Now, I could see tiny fish, minnows, etc., around the edges, but nothing in between, and I did fear the worst. And then about 3 weeks ago, just as a bit of warmer weather came in, I went back on a couple of hours after work, and I managed to catch 4, only very small fish, sort of probably 5-6 inch fish. But all of a sudden, there was fish there, and you know, this next week or two will probably prove just how badly predated we were at that point, going into sort of November and the winter months. You know, the fish just disappear. There is some good cover and some good habitat that Paul picked up on that we've left in situ, and we're going to add to that in time. And I think that's perhaps saved the day in terms of where these fish can hide, because I'd probably, any fish on the stretch were all under these sort of fallen trees, sunken trees, because they're just in hiding. And I've seen it so many times over, Pete. One instance that I can give you, going away from trout, but this does have an impact in terms of salmonoids, is a fish on Derwent water. And what we noticed over this last few years is when it got into August and you had returning cormorants, they sort of disappear around now, really. The end of April, beginning of May, they go and they're obviously breeding. But then when they come back in August, the fish on Derwent water were all in sort of 15 to 20 foot up to sort of mid-August. And we were catching loads of fish. And this is perch fishing, vertical sort of, you know, and you were catching any number of these fish. And then almost, I had a guy over from Hong Kong actually on Bank Holiday weekend, and I'd been out the week before, and we'd had loads of fish. Me and a guy, Dave Pickering, he's one of the best anglers I've probably ever fished with. So if he catches 10, I catch 5. You know, I didn't think I could use the catch a few, but we were catching loads of fish. The week after, my friend from Hong Kong came over and we couldn't find a fish in any of the spots that we'd fished the week before. But there'd been 15, 20 cormorants arrive. And then we found the fish hovering over 50, 60 foot. And I think what them fish have learnt to do is to be in an area where they can see them coming. When they see those birds diving, they just keep going. And they keep going and they keep going to a point where that cormorant, that predator's got to make a decision to try and grab something before it has to go back up. And I know that the cormorants, they can dive to 55 foot, at least, because I'm fishing on Windermere, I've seen a cormorant pick some of his dead bait up in 55 foot. And I thought, bloody hell, they're lethal predators in so much as if you've not got any deep water, the fish are in for a hiding. But what those fish in the Lakeland lakes have managed to suss out very quickly is when they arrive, as long as they're over or access to some deep water, they can get out of the way. And I think the resident brown trout in Derwent water have also sussed that out. And I think this is where, when you start getting to the nitty-gritty of migratory fish that are living in the river, they can't get out the way. Because they won't go to 40, 50, 60 foot. And I think that there's one of the reasons why, for argument's sake, in my opinion, the River Derwent has declined over the last sort of 10 to 15 years, because the migratory smolts and parr, they just sit in ducks. They just sat there in the river and they're just going to get annihilated. And I think that's what happens, Pete. Whereas the coast fish that are in that environment, and the brown trout to some degree, that are in that environment 24/7, 12 months of the year, they've learnt to be over some deeper water and to actually be able to get out of the way. Those fish didn't want to be in that depth of water, Pete, in end of August. I'm sure they would have been, in 20 foot given a choice, but it was a choice of being eaten or moving. Yeah. So they moved over that depth of water. So quite interesting stuff really there, Pete. I mean, just going back to Derwent water, I caught what I thought at the time was a sea trout, which was £6. And again, my friend from Calverton, Francesco, I sent him a scale reading, and it turned out it had never been to see this fish, but it had lived in the river for probably 3 years. It had spawned twice, but since it had been in the lake, it had doubled in weight. So it would have been a fish of probably £2 plus. And then when it's gone into the lake, it's then, obviously, it's changed from its habits from being, a invertebrate sort of fly feeding trout to being more a ferox-led fish, where it's eating probably roach and perch and other trout, I would guess. But that's another interesting one, which from scale sampling has come out. I mean, I've really got into the scale sampling this last few years with the grayling, and I don't know, do you want to come on to that, Pete?
We were going to. What I'd like to do is get a sense of what that, because it's such a beautiful remit of some wonderful fishing. You've given us some lovely environmental standpoints on that as well. And we're sort of rattling through time as well. And I want listeners, they're getting your passion for the river. They're getting your passion for the fish and your observations. And I'm sure there's many people who were listening who said, like I was, that when you said, well, these fish went in 3 years to this sort of size, we're all thinking, must be crayfish. And funnily enough, before we were on, I was looking through social media and somebody was putting crayfish patterns up as well. So they're starting to come on to our radar just that little bit more as well. And I was thinking about the River Kent, because when I head north on the M6, I'm guessing I pass relatively close to it, and it looks the most beautiful stream. So I'm a little bit envious that you get to fish that. But before we move on to the grayling story, I'd like to get a sense of what you do so much different fishing. What is that perfect day for you?
A perfect day in the river will be starting off with a little bit of short line nymphing, picking up a fish or two, fish start rising, and then putting a longer leader on and casting the same method upstream with like a short leader on. And I've done so well with that. The river, which is again close to my heart at the moment, which is the River Darwen, a tributary of the Ribble. That's the one that it will come to and that has suffered the pollution recently. It's very much a bedrock river. You've got bedrock gullies which are quite difficult to fish because one from actually getting near them because it's bloody treacherous. And from a point of view of it's a very short window. You know, it's sort of, I had a guy with me, the guy who sort of had the 4 hookups the other week, and he fishes he's going to fish the big Ribble, as it's called. And it's a big river compared to the tributaries of such as the Darwen. And I set him first a go-to on the main Ribble, and it was a 12-foot tapered leader with another probably 6-8 foot of sort of tippet on that. And I said, if he's fishing dries, I said, that's your starting point. And I said, if you want to fish some spiders, it's more or less the same sort of setup, but you put a dropper on and that's how we started. But to fish that setup on such a small river where there's bedrock gullies, he would have been casting it in the trees every time, and that's a little bit of a problem. So the perfect day's fishing is fishing probably, as I say, fishing the bugs, but then at a point of time when them fish start rising, is just put a longer leader on. I turn round instead of walking downstream, I walk upstream, and that's what we did with this guy. He started fishing two spiders, and I had him set up with a 7'6" one weight, and one of the Luke Bannister's fur leaders on. And we just lengthened that leader and put 2 spiders on, and he was just fishing across and down. And then it all went quiet and a few fish started rising because it was getting later in the middle of the day. And all I did was lengthen that leader, turn around, I said, right, we're going to go back where we've come from and we're going to fish upstream, and used exactly the same setup. And it was a really nice way of fishing. And that's probably would be the perfect day. But as I said at the off, Pete, if it means fishing streamers, if it means fishing, and I'll go on to the dark side, BFS or whatever it may be to catch, because the fish certainly proved it on the Darwen. When those fish are sort of £2 to £3, and there's some really good fish there, a bit like the fish in the Kent, they're not necessarily feeding on invertebrates and flies. They're taking minnows. I mean, I caught what I've been doing as well with the streamer fishing, and this is a bit of the crossover from lure fishing and a sort of a page out of Dave Pickering's book, is he uses some tiny little soft baits, and I've been chopping the tails off these soft baits, and then I've been putting them on a jig hook with a bit of probably a 2mm bead and a collar and some legs on, and the way they fish is outstanding. And I've had some really nice browns on that. So you've got a real crossover. It's like a hybrid of a fly stroke lure, the best of both worlds. And you're casting that. I can cast it on an ultralight lure rod, or I can cast it on my 11-foot 2-weight nymphing rod and fish it on a French leader, and it fishes so well. And the reaction you get, you can clearly see. And one of the first times I used it last summer, the summer before losing track a bit, I hooked this fish, and it was good fish. It was thick end of £3, and it coughed up a minnow which it had some while ago, and I thought, well, that just says it all. These fish are locked onto, because when you do the kick sampling, which is another thing I've got into this last sort of few years, and certainly more so this year with the River Fly project, the amount of stone loach and the amount of bullheads that are under those stones is phenomenal. And when you look at the stone loach, which is the length of your little finger, what a perfect meal that is for any sizable trout, or probably any trout over about 8 ounce, to be fair, but certainly when they get over £1, £2, that's what they're feeding on, as well as the minnows and that. So, it's horses for courses, Pete. I love my streamer fishing. I had a rod actually purpose built, which is a watered down double hander, which is because when I had this guy on the other week, and he had cast a fly rod before, but he'd cast a fly rod on Stocks Reservoir, which is huge, and you've got like loads of back casting room behind you. I said, you can't do that here on this river. I said, you'll just be losing my leaders one after another. So that environment, I had a rod made which is it's about 8 foot, and it's got a removable sort of butt, just like a switch rod. But it's a switch rod. You know, it's a smaller version of that, and I've teamed that up with sort of a Rio streamer line, and I can do a double spare through them pools, and it fishes really nice, and you're not getting snagged up because you're using waterborne casts, and when it's just like salmon fishing in sort of in miniature, you know, when that line tightens up, it's the same bust, Pete. You know, I mean, I've done a lot of salmon fishing over the last sort of probably nearly 20 years. And I had a syndicate rod on the Tyne. I fished on the Dee, Aberdeenshire Dee. I fished on the Tweed. I fished on the. I fished all the big four, and I've caught on springers on a few of them, and there's nothing like it. But the problem that we've got is everybody knows they're just not the same. For me to travel to the Dee, you've got a 3-day window. It's like, let's be realistic, you know. But what I've learnt in that period of spear casting, and as I taught this guy the other week, just a simple roll cast really gets you going down a pool, and fishing streamers like that, which I know is all the buzz at the moment, is good. But I've been fishing streamers on the 11-foot 2-weight with a French leader, and again, those hybrid flies, it's a little bit different because you're fishing pockets. And as Paul Gaskell sort of pointed out last year, you can fish that in low water, because I always sort of related the streamers to coloured water and to a bit of high water, etc. We're fishing it more as a jig style with a French leader, and you're fishing pockets. It's a really interesting fishing upstream. It's a really interesting way of fishing. And when you get a hookup like it could be them big fish, because you're offering them something that they're not going to refuse if it's you know 2 or 3 inches long across the vision of one of them predator trout, and it's having it, like, you know. So yeah, a perfect day could be anything down to the conditions, but that double spare streamer fishing is pleasurable.
Nice. I like the sound of that very much indeed. And I like the ingenuity there as well, and creating a rod for those right circumstances as well. So I kind of like that from that point of view. And, you know, you've touched on that you're a guide. Why become a fishing guide?
Well, Pete, you mentioned that word guide, and it's really, in my mind, a guide is sort of following somebody down a pool and sort of has a knowledge of that water, and cast here, cast there. And, you know, I touched on the fact that I've fished about in Scotland a bit. I've got to say, I've picked waters where there was no gillies, and no offence to the gillies because they're superb, but all I needed to know was part there, start there, I'll see you at 4:30 sort of thing. And I've worked it out for myself. It's more coaching, really, Pete, than I'd class it as guiding. Because, yeah, somebody who knows what they're doing, you're guiding them into sort of different areas and suggesting maybe a method to use, or a technique, or a change of technique, or another area. Whereas this coaching, I mean, as I just go back to the guy a couple of weeks ago, he was raw. He'd not really cast a fly line before, you know, and we had him fishing a very short roll cast with spiders. And he had 4 hookups, you know what I mean? It's a tough river. It's not an easy river. You're not getting 15, 20 takes a day. I know Dave and myself, who do a lot of fishing with, it's a 2 take sort of water at times, you know, on a day, but it could be a real special fish. So coaching, it is more coaching. And, you know, I've worked in tackle shops from even the late 80s. Right through to sort of early 2000s, and then from early 2000s I've worked in magazines and I've worked throughout the industry, and I still work in the industry now. I work for one of the major fishing tackle companies. I've done for 18 years. But as I get a bit older, and I think I've a bit to offer in terms of, and I've got to say, when I worked in the fishing shop, I really enjoyed showing somebody who's completely new to something a full setup, and then them coming back a week later and go, "Poof, we had some fish," and it's superb. You know, I mean, with the coaching, I took some really young kids out recently. The rivers runs through a farm, and it's a working farm where they have open days, and they have school children through. And the owner of the farm, the owner of the beat, asked me would I show them casting. And I thought, they're like, some of these kids were like 8 to 10. You can't really, fly fishing. I mean, there was 10 kids, 2 rows of 5. So, cut a long story short, I had them casting with a close face reel, so there's no bail arm, and just a spinning rod, and we were casting a ball of putty into a bucket, and the buckets got bigger as you went further away. And the reaction that you got, all of a sudden, them kids were sort of, well, this is good. I'm better than him, and he's better than me, and all the rest of it. And I think it's that teaching somebody and getting across to them and bringing, I mean, bloody hell, I was talking like an old bloke now, bringing kids through into the fishing world of whatever we can do. And somebody who's been away from it, I mean, the guy, again, 2 weeks ago, he's your classic sort of Mortimer and Whitehouse watched on the TV. I'm going to have a go at that. And it was a real strange story, Pete. We were on the bird count the other week for the small drop on the Ribble. So we've got to do 2 counts a year for the cormorants, goose and a licence. And I was counting on, I think it was the 10th of May for the small drop. The entire catchment, the entire river, which I might come briefly onto after, it's got to do a count. Start at 8 o'clock in the morning, bottom of the beat, you walk to the top. In theory, you should meet somebody who's done the beat above you and so on and so forth. So you carry out the count throughout the entire catchment. And as I'm walking back up this field on the Ribble, I was reporting that pollution, Pete, when I think back, on the brook on the opposite side. And he came up and I've had my dog with me, and he had a Springer Spaniel that's going mad like they do round here. And he says, "What are you up to?" And I said, we saw, I'm just reporting this pollution over there, actually. He said, "Oh, blinking hell, I've never seen that before." I said, "I walk up here every day." I said, "Well, that's been like that every time I'm here." And then in the next sort of breath, he said, "How'd you get to fish on here?" And I said, "Well, I can probably point you in the right direction." I said, "It's not me to say there's a ticket or whatever." I said, "Well, point in the direction." In his next breath, he said, "Do you know anybody who does any coaching?" And it was like I was looking for sort of Jeremy Beadle sort of over the shoulder, you know what I mean? I thought, somebody's setting me up here. So I didn't let anything out the bag. I just said to him, "There's a number for the fishing, and here's an address to a website. Have a look at that. You might find something of interest." And before I got home, he contacted me and said, "Can you take me out next week?" And he's the stereo classic of probably why I'm doing it.
Nice, beautiful story, and I love your modesty as well, and I like your style there, so big kudos points for that as well, so very much like. I know grayling are close to your heart, and you've touched on it a few times, but can you tell us about how you became involved with reintroducing them to the local stream that you've been mentioning?
Yeah, I mean, the grayling, I've fished for grayling for a number of years, and they're another species that can be here today, gone tomorrow with predation. And we took this stretch of river on. It's exactly 3 years, Pete. It was pretty much on when it's my birthday, beginning of May 2023. Very, very fortunate to actually get access. And again, this is sort of going round in sort of these spooky sort of ways these things tend to play out. We've been doing a lot of work with the Rivers Trust and what have you, and somebody introduced us from the Rivers Trust to the owner of the beat, as it is now, not been fished, was an old chute, and as it had been a chute, it's got all the attributes to somebody that had a fantastic time down there. There's lean-tos, there's cabins, there's even a toilet. It ticks so many boxes. And it's mega private, so you've got it to yourself sort of thing, which is every angler's dream. One of the things that we picked up on pretty quickly was there's some resident trout and there's some good fish, but not loads of fish. not loads. And so the River Darwen is a classic post-industrial revolution river, which runs through Blackburn. It runs past Ewood Park, football ground. It runs underground in places. It runs through Darwen itself, which is further sort of down the catchment. And then it opens up into some beautiful countryside. I mean, the actual river, the stretch is SSI for geology of bedrock and the riverbed and the rock formation. And you're going through listed woodland. So it's like, it's fabulous. But then, and excuse the French, it's a shitty river. And has been for years and years and years. Even the guy that I leased the main ribble off, when I told him I'd taken some fishing on, he says, "Are you joking?" He said, there can't be any, because he doesn't know anything about fishing. He's a farmer, he's got a length of river runs through his land, and that's what I lease off him. It's just a commodity to him. And he said, "There's no fish in there." He said, "It runs a different colour every day." I said, "Well, it might have done 30, 40 years ago." In Darwen itself, it had a big paint plant. So it was known as the Rainbow River, because every day it went a different colour. And the toxins that must have come off that paint, because going back to the 60s, 70s and 80s, there would have been lead and all sorts in it. And as you go down the river, you've got all the cotton industry and mills. And further downstream to us is a huge weir. And when I say huge, it's on the Ribble Trust sort of list of trying to get rid of, but it's going to be so costly because it must be 12 foot plus, maybe 15 foot high, this weir. So what you've got from that is you've got a section of river where the tidal ribble will actually come as quite a way up the Darwen, and then it'll run out of steam the tide, and then you've got a length of river before it hits this weir. And when it hits this weir, nothing's getting past that. Nothing's getting upstream, that is. But what that then gives you, from our point of view with these trout, is nothing's going downstream either. So you've a little bit of a double-edged sword. You've not got any sea trout running. It's impossible. Now, what we did with the EA, and this is sort of working with the environmental agency, and I've got to sort of shout out sort of the guys at Calverton in particular, which will come to sort of the Calverton fish farm in Nottingham. You know, there's Damien from the EA we spoke to about this, and then Richard and Neil and Francesco, who said does the scale sampling. I put to them that before these weirs and all these obstacles and hurdles were put in the fish movement's way, grayling would have had a free pass from the main ribble all the way up the catchment. And I said, in my opinion, the grayling, because we put some dace in, which is another great species to have, and we've also put some chub in, which was given us all year round fishing. And I'll come to chub in a bit in terms of predatory side of a chub, but the dace in particular and grayling are a great species to stock. And the dace and the chub just didn't take to the environment. They disappeared. There's a couple of pools there where they reside, but in the main they went. They probably went over the weir in a flood and ended up back in the main river, which will suit them to the ground. But the species that are pushed on and that we all agreed, because as you perhaps know, Pete, you can't just stock grayling somewhere. They've got to have been. There's a few ways that you can try and get a population established. Getting a little bit technical, there is a paper called the Dorney paper, which outlines the grayling strategy and a brown trout strategy as well. But the grayling that we were interested, we already had some brown trout, you could clearly see that. But I wanted to sort of boost, from a selfish point of view, maybe 12 months fishing and try and get the best out of this river and kickstart it with a species that, in my opinion, and the opinions of the EA, would really take a hold on this stream. And it was the grayling. And one of the ways you can restock grayling is if a river has been badly polluted. and you think that the species could get a foothold and thrive, that's one of the reasons you can get them in. And I would imagine going forward now, predation will be another one of those sort of reasons. But the main reason was that we had already had grayling in that river before the Industrial Revolution, is what we agreed on. And thankfully, Calverton said, yeah, we'll go with it. And it's become, I believe, a bit of a blueprint for other rivers. There's some rivers around Oxfordshire and further south working to the same remit, I believe, because what came out of what I'm going to tell you is that grayling, to actually rear grayling is really difficult in sort of captive environment. You can only take them up to sort of the length of your finger because you've got to have moving water, and the cost incurred in that and moving that water. It's not like a still water species. You've got to keep that flow going. And they were talking about possibly mothballing it because of the amount of effort that it takes to bring these grayling through. And the broodstock of the grayling at Calverton are from the River Wharfe, which, as you know, the freestone rivers of North Yorkshire and Yorkshire are very similar. They just spill off the Pennines one way, and our rivers, the Ribble, starts in Yorkshire. The only good thing to come out of Yorkshire, I think, is the Ribble. Excuse me to anybody who's that way inclined. But anyway, we put grayling in. Cut another long story short, we stocked 1,500 grayling. And I can clearly remember that Damien from the EA, he came with these two, like goldfish bags of fish. And I looked at them and I thought, they're not going to last 3 days in this river. They're going to be eaten. They're only the length of your little finger. And I thought, they're going to be gone in no time. I thought, but anyway, I was, because we'd stocked dace and what I was expecting 6-inch fish. And these were pinhead. They were tiny. 2 carrier bags, 1,500 fish. And it was like, okay, let's give it a go. That was May 2023. Those fish in March last year spawned on the same spot almost that we stocked them. And following on from the 2023 stocking, we also did the same again, 2024, 1,500 fish. And the same last year for a third hit of 1,500 fish. So it's like 4,500 fry. Sounds a lot. It's 6 carrier bags full, Pete. It looks nothing. But wow, what a story they've created. You can actually see each year classes you catch them now. The 2023 fish are between 1.25 pounds and 1.5 pounds. And the 2024 are probably 10 ounce to a pound. And last year's are all about 4 ounce to 6 ounce. But for them getting from the length of your little finger in May, I was catching them on single nymphs in August, 3 inch long. The growth rate is phenomenal, and which is really good in so much as it's only a short river, the Darwen. It's 19 miles long, and when it's in flood, it's an angry river. Because of all this bedrock, there's not many you think, oh, what's going to survive this? But they do. But the interesting thing is, and this is one of the things anybody sort of considering stocking them, is the environment really suits them. When you do the kick sampling down there, it's phenomenal. I mean, that pollution that we had last week, one of the first things I did last Bank Holiday Monday was did a kick sample. And thankfully, the kick sample for the Riverfly project was as good as it was at the end of April on the score. And that's another thing, just going back to pollution reporting. The Riverfly project is phenomenal. And every credit to all them that's been involved in it for the years that they have been, because that historics is there. So the food for them grayling, and it's a different species in terms of how it feeds compared to a trout. The grayling sort of in the gravel, it's grubbing about. It's really took a liking to the stretch, and it's really took those invertebrates. No wonder they're doing as well as they are, because when you do a kick sample, I mean, Keith, who I said jokingly before we we started the show, Pete, the podcast, he threw me under the bus, as I said to you. Him and Ash, his missus, they couldn't believe how much life is in like a 4-foot square of river, having done a 3-minute kick sample. It was lifting. And the other thing, even though we had that pollution and I fished the other Friday, what was really sort of unbelievable in my opinion, considering that this was a dead river and this is a river that ran every different colour. There was true mayfly coming off all last Friday. And it's like, I remember when I went to the river fly project, the teaching, with the guy who was running the class, and he mentioned about the mayfly, and I'm thinking, I'll never see them on the on the Darwin. It's chalk stream stuff, or you know what I mean. I've seen them on Derwent Water and Coniston and places, but there's one or two you do see a few on the Ribble, but it's nothing like what you see on sort of a chalk stream or on Corrib or something like that. It's like, I thought you're never going to see them. But wow, that last Friday, even though we had this pollution, the amount of mayfly and big sedges coming off was phenomenal. Nothing took them like, but it was phenomenal. So the grayling, just getting back to this, so we've had 3 stockings, 4,500 fish, and the first year's stocking, and I was a bit unsure at first because they spawn really early, grayling. They're spawning at the end of February, March, and then where we'd stop them is like a very streamy, shallow sort of part of the river, which is only coincidence because that's where the access is. And the EA sort of brought these 2 carrier bags on a big lorry, which EA sort of truck. And when I went on sort of the end of February last year and I had a look and I thought, there's some clean gravel here. And when you look round it, it's all, why should it be clean? Because there's like sediment over a lot of the other areas of the river. And then when you looked harder, you could see another and another and another. So I took some photographs and I sent them to the lads at Calverton, and they pretty much agreed that would have been the class of 23 spawning in 2025/6. And this year will probably be the crux of whether how successful they've been, because as I say, we stocked some fish in May which are the length of your finger, and in August I was catching them fishing single nymphs and they were like 3-4 inch long maybe, and but we didn't know whether they were spawners or whether they were the fry that we'd put in. They're only a couple of 100 yards from where we put them, so again, several floods after, they were still there. And one of the things is now that batch of 3 years has spread across probably, well, our stretch is about a mile, and from the top to the bottom. And you can see the E-class, but the interesting thing is they've not all stuck together. The 2023 fish, the 2024 fish, the 2025 fish, you can catch all sizes. You can catch 24s and 25s in the same run. But yeah, so quite a story.
Yeah, it's a beautiful story, and I've really enjoyed listening to it. Now, look, we're coming up nearly an hour now. Time has gone round really, really quickly. And when you're on these wonderful trips, when you're doing these wonderful things, and I know people are going to really enjoy listening to this story and how you've been involved so closely with the river, which it's a beautiful story. Is there a piece of music that helps set the tone for that trip to one of these rivers, one of these lakes? What is the piece of music that you love to listen to?
Well, Pete, as I said from the off, I've listened to pretty much every podcast that you've done, and every credit to you for keeping it running as it is. And I think while the podcast has come to Wigan, I think there's only one thing that you could really go away with, and that's of Northern Soul. So what I want you to do, and the listeners to do, is think yourself, put yourself in that favourite pool that you have, and you're shuffling your way down the pool, casting, doing that double spay, even if it's with a streamer or a set of nymphs, and then a fish rises in the middle of the pool, and you think, ooh, heartbeat's turning up a couple of notches. You go a couple more steps on, and then boom, the line tightens, and it is that line tightening which is one of the bugs in the tug. The line tightens, the rod starts bucking and the fish is on the surface thrashing around, and your heartbeat has really gone through the roof. So the track I'd like to pick is by the MVPs, and its name is Turning My Heartbeat Up by the MVPs, and it's a real up-tempo dancer. And if you ever get a chance to listen to it, you'll be dancing your way all the way down that pool.
Love that, Neil. Love that very, very much. And as a Northern Soul fan myself, it's lovely to. I think it's probably the first time we've had Northern Soul on there. I think on.
Well, keep the faith, Pete.
Yeah, you got it. You got it. I know what you mean. And for listeners, if you haven't heard Northern Soul before, I think it may be on the original playlist, but go search out the original version of Tainted Love. That'll be your gateway into Northern Soul. For so many people, it has been. And it's just an amazing, the soft cell version is fabulous, but the original is fabulous in a completely different way. That's it. You got it. Yeah. I
it was soft cell in the 80s when they brought that out.
Yeah.
I was a big Northern Soul nut at the time, and it was like, how dare they?
Yeah. No, it's a beauty. Yeah, I've got a sense it may be on the Spotify list somewhere. I may have put that on because I do like it, but beautiful gateway into it. So, Neil, your passion is incredibly strong. It just floods through the speakers here, and it's beautiful. If people want to get hold of you, if they want to track you down, if they would like some advice, if they would like some, and I love the way that you termed coaching as well. I thought that was a beautiful description of it. But how would people find you? What are your handles? And I know you're relatively new to social media as well.
Yeah, I've sort of kept it at arm's length for don't know how many years. Gone under the radar a little bit, but with the coaching side of it, sort of, it's a must-have. I've got to say, I've enjoyed it, even though it's been difficult at times, loading pictures, and God knows what, I'm not an IT buff by any stretch. But the website's probably your starting point, because everything else is West Pennine Angling Solutions.co.uk. And the Facebook and Instagram is exactly that as well. West Pennine Angling Solutions, and you'll find us there. And there's contact details there, and obviously through Facebook and Instagram, you can contact us through that. But the website took some doing, to be fair, Pete. And I've got to say now, while we've got the opportunity, the last page is dedicated to probably somebody who got me first and foremost into sort of the media, the magazines, and all that side of it. And it's Jan Porter, who sadly passed away 10 years, which is unbelievable again. 10 years have gone by. But there's quite a tribute to Jan on that. And I know Jan, if he turned his hand to short line nymphing, he would have been an absolute master, because fishing a whip and pull to hand and that sort of fishing was just another method. As I've said, a lot of these methods to me are just another method. I've been fishing for barbel, chub, trout, grayling, salmon. It's just another method. But yeah, the website's a great starting point, and hopefully you'd find something that's of interest to you on the website as well.
That's fabulous. Well, thank you so much, Neil. It's been lovely to speak with you today, to get a little bit about the backstory, about the places that mean so much to you, and importantly, what you're doing to protect them as well, which is absolutely fantastic. And I hope people find that as an inspiration as well. So I would like to say to you, thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast today. And I've really enjoyed speaking with you.
Thanks for having us, Pete. All the best, and keep up the good work.
Well, everyone, this has been another episode of the Fly Culture podcast. As ever, there's never going to be any charge for these. I just love speaking to people like Neil, hearing their story and sharing it with you. So these are just keep coming and rolling on down the line. But yeah, for the time being, go search out Gloria Jones and Tainted Love. You'll thank me for it a little bit later. Thank you so much for listening.
Thanks for listening to the Fly Culture podcast, brought to you in association with the Voice of Game Angling, Trout and Salmon, where Pete is the editor.